the notice of motion, we'll get Councillor Ferry. So what will happen is Councillor Ferry will open her notice of motion, then there'll be questions, I believe, and then we'll go into, if there is any debate, members can debate like a regular motion, and then Councillor Ferry will also have the opportunity to close up if she feels she would like to do so. Kia ora, Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora, thank you very much. So I think what I'm going to use my initial speaking time for is to sort of explain the notice of motion, its purpose. I did put that in the background that is on the agenda, and I was away last week when the notice of motion was signed off and accepted by the CEO, but I did ask for staff to circulate it to everyone so they had it actually before the agenda was published, because I acknowledge that this is something that's a little bit outside what we usually are talking about around this table. International issues don't usually come to us, and this notice of motion is very narrowly focused on the part of our work that actually does touch on international issues, which is how we spend ratepayers' money, how we spend the other part of our income, which is significant, that comes from Aucklanders through other channels as well. So it's very focused on what we do around our procurement, which is our business and is well within our remit. So that's the purpose of the narrow focus of it. At this point, it's about getting advice from staff about, are we using any of the businesses that are on the UN list? The list is about 150, 160 businesses. And I want to clarify also that it is very specifically, it is not Israeli businesses, it is not Jewish businesses, which would be terrible. We should never consider something like that. It is very specifically businesses operating in the illegal Israeli settlements on Palestinian occupied land. And one of the reasons it's important to make that distinction is because that is the distinction made in international law and by our own government, that it should be a discrimination against those businesses operating only in those circumstances. So it is not a wider boycott of Israeli businesses. It is very, very narrowly focused and very much in line with, has been pointed out by our presenters, very much in line with the UN resolutions, which go back to 2016. So although this is the first time this has come to us to seek alignment, actually this is something that's 10 years old. It's the same age as my youngest son. So seeking to align with central government and, as has been pointed out, international law. So I just wanted to clarify those points in terms of what we're doing today. We're seeking advice from staff to check, are we already aligning with this? Hopefully the answer to that is yes. If the answer to that is no in any way, then we will face another decision that will come to us with advice, because it's always important that we make decisions based on advice, at another time. Today's decision is to seek that advice, to check. And that's all that it is doing. I'd really appreciate your support for this. Although everyone in this room will be aware of the broader international context, which is rapidly changing as well, because when I started work on writing this, we did not have the situation in Iran that we now have, the situation in Lebanon as well. So events are changing very quickly in the Middle East. But this, as I say, is something that's been around for 10 years. And also I know that we have a range of views around the table about our role on international issues. Some of us believe that we should, as community leaders, take a position on this kind of stuff, particularly where community members have asked us to. Some of us feel that it's not something that as local government elected representatives we should get involved in, and then there's all sorts of shades in between. This is something that is sort of putting that to one side in a way, is saying that actually we have a responsibility with how we spend ratepayers' money, how we spend other income, which is actually more than we get from ratepayers. Sorry, that's a little constant refrain of mine. And that is to comply with international law and central government expectations, and very specifically on this one, this is something we can do today to get that advice, to send a small step forward on something that, when it comes back to us, could be a wider expression of solidarity if this body chooses to do so. So I'll leave it there in terms of explaining and reserve my right of reply. Kia ora. And I move it. Sorry, Sandra's mouthing at me that I need to officially move it. Sorry, we don't do notices of motion very often, so we're all a little bit rusty. Well, I am.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Ferry and Councillor Patterson-Hamlin. Right, are there any questions of clarification for Councillor Ferry as the mover? Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. In recalling these sorts of notices of motion on significant world events and the like, and understanding the intent behind it, the experience that I've had and over the history of the precedent for these sorts of things, they've always been held at the governing body. And I would feel very uncomfortable for it to be dealt with here. And I want to foreshadow, unless you can give me clear explanation for why it's here and not the governing body, I'd like to foreshadow that I will move an amendment that it be referred to the governing body of the council.
Cool. I can probably answer that unless Councillor Ferry does at the end, but you cannot now, under our new standing orders, amend a notice of motion at all. You can support it or not. That was under the standing orders that we approved last year, late last year under the new term. And there was a long process that Councillor Ferry went through, both with Phil Wilson and the Mayor's office, and it was decided more appropriately that it came to this committee as its policy, but also the fact we can include Haukura members in the decision. But that was a discussion by the Mayor's office and others, yeah, because it would be a change of policy. The advice actually would end up at value for money around procurement potentially as well in the future if there's a decision. But yeah, we can't actually amend a notice of motion now. Deputy Mayor?
So can I ask a question of staff? Is that possible now? Or
Probably of Megan if she can.
yeah,
if she
Megan.
can.
If this is law already, why are we asking staff to go away and check? Is there any doubt that as Auckland Council we are not abiding by government law? And I just don't want to waste staff's time we all know that central government often has laws that override what we do, right? So I am just asking. I don't want to waste anyone's time for hours going away and doing a whole lot of research because we should be following the law, surely.
Through the chair, this is a matter of international law, and individual states and countries have opportunities to make their own laws around it. So there is no New Zealand law around this, and therefore no law that we have to abide by in terms of this nation. So therefore, we have the ability, though, to look at what's happening internationally in international law and directions and guidance and other things that come through as to whether or not we want to meet or support anything like that. So I'm quite clear that this is not a matter that we are unlawfully either supporting or not supporting, but there is an opportunity for us to look at it, and that's what we are being asked to do through the notice of motion.
Supplementary, you don't ordinarily support, Auckland Council doesn't ordinarily follow international law, it just follows New Zealand government law. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so local government's a creature of statute, so it needs to meet government law, and that may or may not follow international law, obviously depending on the issue. So yeah, we look to government law as our absolute requirement, and we can look further, like in this case, for example, and that's what we're being asked to do now.
And my understanding, if you would like to clarify, Councillor Ferry, that it's about aligning to the government's position, which we wouldn't necessarily need to, but
Yeah,
this
so to clarify further, that's why I put in the background a quite a lengthy series of quotes that outlines the central government position, and so international law is kind of one of those fuzzy things that it's not like a statute for us where we have to follow it. International law is much more guidelines in reality, and the way that it operates, and I'm aware that we have people around the table who will know more about this than me, but the way that it operates in this particular case is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has extensive current advice, and their position aligns with not supporting, as I think the phrasing used, illegal Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian territories. But then they, as Megan says, they haven't passed a law that says that nobody in New Zealand can do that. And I note that a number of other councils have already looked at this and progressed or not progressed this. So it is fair to say, I think, that the central government position is clear. How it impacts on us is more as guidance. And so it's, are we aligning with that position, not are we aligning with their law, because they haven't got a law, they've got a position. Sorry if that's confusing, but it is really different the way that international law plays out as opposed to local law, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williamson.
Who passes international law? How does it get to be international law?
So in this case, we're talking about a UN Security Council resolution, which is all in the papers that were on the published agenda. And so it was passed by the UN Security Council.
But that's not international law. Just because the Security Council abides by something is not international law.
Well, the expectation is that it is complied with by members of the UN.
Sure. Yes, it's expected that people will comply, but to have their own set of laws that make that bring that into effect. Because there isn't a particular institution somewhere sitting that says, we have passed a law today, the bill's done, and that's international law.
Just want to stick to a question of Councillor Ferry. We can debate it in the debate. But.
Yeah, but we're now saying that we are trying to get this council to abide by international law, and I want to know who set up international law that covers this. I know about a UN resolution. I was a member of the National Party when that was done in 2016. I was a member of Parliament. But I want to know why this council is now saying we support international law, and you can't tell me exactly how the international law was passed, because there isn't such a court.
So the resolution is clear that this is about aligning with the resolution of...
Correct. We're aligning ourselves with the resolution of the Security Council. Okay, that's different to international law.
It's clearly what it states in B and C, that it is alignment with the policies and practices with UN Security Council Resolution 2334. It's pretty clear.
Are there any other questions? Cool. Okay, so we will stop questions and move now into debate if people would like to debate this. Is there anyone put themselves forward? Councillor Patterson-Hamlin and then Councillor Watson after that.
Kia ora. I'm very honoured to be seconding this notice of motion today. I want to acknowledge some very special faux constituents in the room. Saleh, Asma, Mina, Mira and Khairi. Mina, Mira and Khairi attend school with my children in Avondale. They moved here just over a year ago from Gaza, where they experience things no one should ever have to experience, least of all children. And that they are thriving at Kura is nothing more than extraordinary. Look, I'm under no illusions here. I'm aware that neither Benjamin Netanyahu nor Donald Trump are currently quaking in their boots because Auckland Council has a notice of motion. But we are, as we have said several times in this room in different contexts, a multi-billion-dollar organisation, kaitiaki of a lot of public money, a public who marched in unprecedented numbers last year against these occupations. And we do have influence. We can't stop the bombs dropping on Palestine. We can't stop more illegal settlements or release the thousands of prisoners held without charge or trial. We can't walk back a genocide, but what we can do is make sure without a shadow of a doubt that none of that public money, not 1 cent of it, is being used to further that genocide or put any guns in anyone's hands or facilitate the purchase of drones that murder children because they are Palestinian and for no other reason. Please vote for this notice of motion. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. Councillor Watson.
Yes, I'll begin by thanking the mover and seconder of this notice of motion and for the background information that they supplied. I guess the other reason that Sarah alluded to why this is of interest to Auckland Council is that last September there was a pro-Palestine march where there was crowds estimated between 20 and 50,000 Aucklanders turned up. So I think that alone indicates the interest of the people we represent in this issue. There is the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334 that was adopted in 2016, as we heard, and declared quite clearly that the Israel settlement activity in the occupied Palestinian territory was a flagrant violation of international law, and our mover and seconder told us this, and that, I guess more to the point, UN has since consistently reported that Israel has failed to comply with the demand to cease these activities, and indeed settlement expansion has continued at high levels. We as a little country have more than a passing interest in this resolution, as we heard. There were 4 elected members who put that forward. New Zealand was one of them, along with Malaysia, Senegal and Venezuela. And as I mentioned in my question, it was adopted with 14 members of the Security Council voting in favour, and only the United States abstaining. And Mr. McCulley, who was then the Foreign Minister, said that this was consistent with long-held New Zealand policy positions on Palestine. Interestingly enough, after the vote, and by contrast, the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, called for working ties to be limited with the countries on the Security Council. And in respect of New Zealand and Senegal, which co-sponsored the resolution, it was reported in Haaretz that Mr. Netanyahu had threatened Foreign Minister Murray McCulley that advancing the resolution would be tantamount to a declaration of war. So that's the mentality that we've been dealing with here. In terms of the resolution, it's worth noting that since that time, and as of now, early 2026, there are over 500 illegal Israeli settlements and outposts spread across the West Bank, and that these have been accelerated with state-backed construction. The settler population is more than 700 to 750,000 Israeli settlers live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, roughly 500,000 alone in the West Bank, and that in April 2026 is reported that Israeli cabinet had approved 34 new settlements. So this is very much a live issue. However, I think it's important to note in terms of the illegal occupation of Palestinian land that this occurs in conjunction with over 2 years of genocide in Gaza, just 30 kilometres to the west. Gaza, if we put it in an Auckland perspective, is 365 square kilometres. Auckland Council region is 13 to 14 times larger than Gaza. And what's been happening in Gaza? Well, in October, when there was a ceasefire last year, at that stage there were 67,000 Palestinians had been killed. At least 20,000 of them children were among the dead. 1 child every hour. That's out of date, those figures now. If you look at the latest, 72,328 killed in Gaza, 749 people killed since the ceasefire, 1,079 killed in the West Bank, which is the subject of today's notice of motion. Just as bad, over 170,000 Palestinians have been injured with life-altering wounds. 125 hospitals and clinics damaged and destroyed. 1,700 health and aid workers have been killed. Physicians arrested and imprisoned. Senior doctors died under Israeli custody. 790 documented attacks on health facilities. 459 people in October who had died of starvation. That was and included 1 child and 4 suffered from severe acute malnutrition. At least 2,600 people killed and nearly 20,000 injured while trying to collect food aid. 89% of Gaza's water and sanitation infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed. 92% of all residential buildings have been destroyed. 88% of commercial facilities have been destroyed. 62% of Gaza's residents have lost legal documentation of property ownership. 92% of schools require complete construction. 10,800 Palestinians are held in Israeli prisons, including 450 children. 4,000 are held nearly without charge or trial. And for the people trying to tell us about that, the journalists, 300 of them, journalists and media workers, have been killed. A very dangerous war to try and report the truth on, making it the deadliest war for journalists in human history. Back to our resolution, and in summation, Mr. Chair, New Zealand supports international law principles behind the resolutions that are before us today. And in fact, even our recent actions have focused on ensuring international law compliance. We have supported the ICJ and settlement stance, the database actions that are in the agenda, the support for the General Assembly resolutions. Just in 2024, New Zealand voted in favour of a UN General Assembly resolution demanding that Israel end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory within 12 months, and so forth and so on. So I just finished by saying, Mr. Chair, that in the face of such calculated and brazen disregard for United Nations resolution and calculated barbarism and moral depravity that's unprecedented this century, I don't think it's too much to ask Auckland Council's officials to check that our policies and practices align with the United Nations Security Council resolutions that our government has supported so strongly. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much for that. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, it will come as no surprise to you as I'm going to be voting against this, not because of any of the merits of the issue whatsoever. And as I said, as a member of the National Party and a member of Parliament at the time, clearly supported what was being done by my government. My opposition to this today is simply we are just a continuous target from central government about telling us to stick to our knitting and get on with things that are for a local body to be doing. And I'm sorry, but we've got specific roles and functions we should be fulfilling. And I think that we are a creature of statute, as Megan pointed out, and there are things in the Local Government Act that are telling us what we should be doing. And I do not believe that we should be spending our time. Yes, you've got political parties and a government that you can be going to their meetings and getting them to agree to things, because that is a central government role. But we take away our ability to argue strongly about why our rates are going up and why we're doing things, when we can have the reverse come to us and said, then why the hell are you getting involved in the things that are just not the role of a local authority? And I'm sorry, but I intend to vote against this. Nothing to do with the merits of what's going on and whether I support either one side or the other. I think there's ghastly stuff. There's atrocities being conducted. And finally, I'll make one comment. I've got a little notebook, quite full of them, and I can actually send it to anybody that wants to see it, of the brazen disregard for resolutions passed through the Security Council that nearly all of its major members have. There are countries at that Security Council who say we're in favour of, freedom of expression, and they are slaughtering anybody who says they're gay. They say we're in favour of equal rights for everybody, but women aren't even allowed to go out of the building without someone with them and drive a car. So please be very careful to bringing up about United Nations and how phenomenal their regimes are. I can take you through a list of pages of appalling breaches of United Nations standards. They're one of the worst, and you see a body where I think Iran is currently chairing the Human Rights Council. Seriously, that has got to be a joke beyond belief. So, I'm putting my name down as I'm voting against the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson, thank you. And just, yeah, I understand these issues are passionate, but we'll just try and get everyone. Okay, cool. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll be very quick. I firstly just want to commend the excellent contributions of my colleagues, Councillor Ferry, Patterson-Hamlin and Councillor Watson. And I just urge most of all my colleagues to reflect upon those contributions, because there was some amazing stuff in there and really, really interesting stuff. And please use that to support this motion. I think they spoke so well. I don't have too much else to add, save for one thing. I want to just sort of gently challenge the contention that this isn't part of our work. I think it's directly part of our work. Firstly, in running the city's finances and providing their public services, that requires us to procure, requires us to enter into contracts, it requires us to deal with companies. And so we need to be assured that we are following both domestic law and International Security Council resolutions when we do that. I think that's fairly standard practice. It's what we do in other areas of life, and I don't see it as particularly controversial to ask the question and get the advice, because that's what this motion does, is it requests advice. So I don't see that as earth-shattering from that perspective in terms of local council services. But where things may make an impact in the advocacy space, most of our job is to run the city, right? And all the finances, all that kind of stuff that I just said. But we're also looked upon from Aucklanders to advocate and to lead. We're politicians. This is a political space. A lot of our job is taking stances on issues. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We do this all the time. And I don't see this as particularly controversial, frankly. I think it is our duty to lead. It's our duty to lead on human rights and international law and international norms. So I'm very proud to support this motion, and I thank everyone for your contributions. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much. Councillor Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. I certainly support this notice of motion, and given the opposition to it is not substantive. The opposition I've heard around the table is technical, if you like, whether it's appropriate for this council, for this governing body to have a view or even to ask questions about how this council is complying directly or indirectly with a United Nations Security Council resolutions. Essentially, what the notice of motion is about is essentially a timely audit. Timely given the world situation right now, about where we stand in compliance with that moral obligation, at least, of that resolution. The Councillor Williamson is quite right, and he has a lot of experience in Parliament, a number of ministerial portfolios, so he should be listened to carefully. But I think if he challenges the status of the UN Security Council, where does that leave us, or where does that leave anyone? But of course, international law is not just based on resolutions of the UN Security Council. There is the Hague Convention. There's the Statute of Rome, and a number, Geneva Conventions. All of those count for international law. Colleagues are law-abiding people. They had to be elected and to be re-elected, and therefore the law is not just, our compliance with the law is not just technical, it's also moral. And you don't leave your conscience behind when you move from Parliament to the Auckland Council. The Auckland Council is a regional government of Auckland. It is a regional council as well as a city council, and therefore we do have moral obligations. Also, the fact of the matter is we have major investments. I think the budget will be due to sign off pretty soon, is around about $7.9 billion. It's completely appropriate to ensure that, given the world situation, given the state of war, or is it war? It's certainly not peace. It's neither, perhaps, at this point in time, neither war nor peace, but a war is going on nonetheless in the Middle East, at least a part of it, despite the temporary truce, and that I'm referring to is Lebanon, and of course the ongoing persecution and brutality, worse than brutality in Gaza, which I think is very much motivating this notice of motion and the support for it coming from the community. Councillor Watson has detailed the list of atrocities against civilians, which certainly are war crimes, and certainly incredibly brutal, unspeakable in fact. So I won't go into them, but I want to acknowledge the members of the public here, the Palestine Solidarity people who have worked for months, years indeed, speaking out against this terrible persecution, this Holocaust, in fact, inflicted on the people of the Middle East by one particular country, Israel. And therefore, I have to say, Mr. Chair, that I will be fully supporting this request, this notice that is entailed in this notice of motion, and the moral reasons I'm sure that are prompting it. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone who's presented. And I can feel the passion from everyone speaking. I do not leave my morals behind anywhere, and I do not leave my brains behind anywhere, and I try to come to everything I commit to doing with the best efforts I can. But I am not equipped with the understandings of all this. I'm listening to everybody, but in my head, I can also see all the newsreels that I've watched across many different platforms and the atrocities everywhere. Last year, I was in the Hiroshima War Museum and saw the atrocities that happened in the Second World War. I'm not equipped I got into this job to fix the potholes, to clear the drains, and to fix Auckland. And sometimes I feel very inadequate at doing that. And I feel far more inadequate at making a judgment on this sort of call. I could look at abstaining, but that would be a cop-out. I do not believe that this is our job. And I praise God that I live in New Zealand, but I'll be voting against it. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you. I'd like to thank those that spoke in public forum, but in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Abigail, Ellen and Justine Sachs for speaking as members of the Jewish community and your bravery in doing so. I believe ratepayers do want to know, and I believe ratepayers do care about the services, who we procure services from, who we invest with, who we procure assets from. So I don't see an issue with this notice of motion being brought here to Auckland Council, to this committee. And I thank the Councillor Ferry and Councillor Patterson Hamlin for bringing this here, and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor Winiata.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the voices against this because they speak to the policy and whether or not they feel that their role is to make decisions around this. And I would implore anyone that's upset about that to just appreciate the fact that we do live in a democracy here, and that while it might not be the answer that you want, nobody has said that they don't support the atrocities, what you are trying to do. We risk going into quite a deep black hole. I'm aware of one American company where there are multiple banks in New Zealand that have investments with this particular company, which provides AI data and analytics through to those that are forcing those in Palestine into submission. And while the ASB has turned its nose up at Motorola, it does have investments in other companies that do support this, right down to one bank having KiwiSaver investments going through there. So where does this stop when council finds itself without a bank to hold any of its debt? You might say, well, out the window with a lot of them, but the Auckland Council, being the organisation that it is, carries a lot of weight in terms of what it needs to provide for its ratepayers. With respect to the occupation and the atrocities that Palestine is facing, New Zealand is approximately 180 odd years on from land grabs and atrocities that it faced itself back in the 1860s. So, and we are still working through those many, many years later. So we need to be aware of how we support it, whether our role is to support it, and whether or not we actually have that voice. Some of the support against has been against policy. My question would be, how much investment is going into this to look into what we're trying to accomplish here, but also what are the outcomes that we might be facing when we say we don't want to support any investments or any companies that are investing, because there's going to be some small spider in this wee web, this very large web, of investments in corporate businesses around the world with this global structure that we all stand with. Now, if any of you sitting here are with any New Zealand bank, then you're all providing some form of assistance to that. And that's quite the conundrum, because we need banks. We need somewhere to hold the money. I see a shake of the head there, and I certainly appreciate what you're saying. But the reality is, if we're going to operate as we are as councillors, we need financial institutions to be able to assist us. We need banks and financial institutions. Yeah, I see the shake of the head, and we can discuss that later, and I'm quite happy to. I support this because it's no skin off my back in order to make a decision to allow this to go forward. I certainly appreciate what Councillor Ferry and Councillor Patterson Hamlin have done by trying to put this forward, because it means that we take a stand. And if taking a stand doesn't hurt me or the ratepayer at any cost, then that's not the worst thing. However, I am very wary of the black hole that we step into when we find how tangled these corporations are within the investments that New Zealand holds. So I think we should all be very cautious with where this may end up and what we're holding ourselves to. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Member Karen Wilson. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I firstly want to say it's great to see so many of you here today for this item on the agenda. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the mover and the seconder and the well-crafted, well-researched, well-spoken to motion that's being put there, because it's difficult, as we can tell by the length of the meeting that we're having here. So I acknowledge that I did hear what is intended as it relates to Auckland Council and the roles and responsibilities that's required. So that's, from my perspective, the reason why we're listening to this today. Now, we can't go past, clearly, the emotion and the experiences that are also incumbent. But I'm lucky that I'm able to hear both, because it is important, going to the points that were raised about how this relates to this council and this committee. The only concern that I did have, which I suppose motivated me to speak, was the notion that it should go to the governing body and therefore would exclude Haukura. And that would mean we wouldn't get overview, nor would we have an ability. So that, I guess, also added to the notion that we should be, as well as Haukura, given the nature of what's being looked at here today, and specifically the whakapapa of what is being experienced by a lot of you there. So I also acknowledge Councillor Lee's contribution, word for word, would I say, in terms of what he's expressed, I support and acknowledge. Having said that, my vote will be in support of this motion. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Member Wilson. Are there any other, Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair. There's been some incredible contribution here today, and colleagues that I deeply respect, you know, people like Councillor Watson talking about the genocide that all of us find completely abhorrent. It's, you know, it's just beyond our belief. The death of the children in the way that he has so eloquently described. My difficulty is the precedent that we set. And there's no disrespect to Haukura. It's an anomaly of the statute that you don't sit at the GB. But for me, the GB is the primary committee. So if we want to make a statement in terms of advocacy, to my mind, it should be at that level. But the difficulty that I've got is the precedent that we set by this today. I mean, for one, I think Donald Trump's a madman. I would like, and he hasn't even arrived yet, I'd probably like a notice of motion to say that the American ambassador should be withdrawn. But you know, is that going to be what I'm going to do next month? Because now we've set the precedent for this. We're all going to raise all of the issues that all of us feel internationally we want dealt with at the Policy and Planning Committee when we have an obligation to be dealing with PC 120 and everything associated with that. That is not to demean the passion that these people are bringing to us today and the feelings that we all might have. I'm really struggling because I don't believe this is the appropriate place for us to be having this discussion, and it might mean that we're not fulfilling our obligations as councillors to do those things that we are required to do under the delegations of this committee. So while Councillor Turner may think it's a cop-out, I'm going to abstain today because I just don't believe this is the right place for us to have this dialogue. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? I'll speak briefly and then back to Councillor Ferry. the right place. This is a committee of the whole. All members of the council are able to be at this meeting, and we also have the benefit of having Hokura here with us, which I think is a good reason to have it here. I did not choose to have it on this committee, but it is here, and I think it is appropriate that we debate it. If you look under the terms of reference of the Policy Planning and Development Committee, it talks about the policies, it talks about social and economic policies, and the scope is quite correctly within this committee, but also committees of the whole are a part of the governing body, but we also have our Hokura members here. So I'm fine with the process that's gone through. I know that both the mover and the seconder went through this quite a long period with the Mayor's office, with the CEO and others to make sure it was appropriate. I think that no doubt that members have touched on the atrocities and the huge concerns that many of us have watching and seeing the images. And yes, we are privileged to live in this country, but we know that we can't turn a blind eye for centuries. It's important for other parts of the world to not turn a blind eye to atrocities happening in other areas. And we have amazing people who thankfully could make it to our shores to have a safe haven because their home is not safe. This is not a new thing. Sadly, New Zealand recognises that the illegal occupation of Palestine has been happening since the 60s. Obviously, we have seen on our TV screens that over 70,000 members officially. Those numbers we know will be far higher. Mostly, the majority women and children being killed, and then hundreds of thousands more displaced. Something I don't think any of us. I have a 4-year-old son, and seeing those images on TV, I could never imagine what it is like to trying to bring up a child in such devastation. But putting aside somehow the atrocities and our feelings about this item and this decision is only about A, asking advice, but B, asking for advice on how we're investing. We are one of the biggest, if you want to call us a business, and I would never call us a business, but we are one of the biggest businesses or entities in the city, if not the country. The amount of investment we make in both monetary and in procurement and contracts and projects is significant. So it's not, we are bigger than some of the banks. We are bigger than Spark. We are bigger than many others that I could name. So it is important, I think, through this resolution that we are looking to make sure we're investing in the right places. And Councillor Fletcher, any one of us can bring forward notice of motions like this. And sometimes I've heard us spend 4 or 5 hours debating what can be an insignificant item, and I don't think this is insignificant. It has been 1 hour and 17 minutes, but we had a debate a couple of weeks ago that went on for 5-6 hours. We've had many debates about catering. We've had debates about discretionary spending. We've had debates about our membership to a local government, New Zealand, that lasted for 4 or 5 hours. So there are things that take our view away from other things, but I think we've got a long agenda that we can still focus on the business, and it's up to all of us to actually debate what comes in front of us. And I believe the chair and the mover and seconder did their best to try and make this as defined as possible to what our responsibility is. There could have been, I imagine, and I've seen it many a time, there could have been far more significant resolutions about our feelings, our positions, and a whole bunch of things, but this is very specific to if we are aligned with the government's resolutions and support and policies, and whether our investment is aligned with that. And I think this, and I've spoken to staff because I wanted to understand what would happen from here, and it is within staff's regular focus that they can look at this. They're always looking at our investments, where we are and aren't investing. Things like the living wage, things like climate, things like Māori outcomes, all of that is already constantly being looked into. So staff don't believe this is going to take a lot of time and effort over what they're already doing. We won't be contracting out this service to do this work. So I believe that it is a clear, defined thing for us to be looking at, and it is up to other members, whatever they bring to this table, if they feel like it's within our jurisdiction. So I'll be very clearly supporting this resolution, and it will be interesting to see, and I hope that the resolution shows that we aren't investing in the illegal occupation of Palestine. I assume we aren't. I would hope that we aren't, but I do take what other members have said, that we just need to back it up with future decisions from here. But I'll pass back to Councillor Ferry for closing this item. But
Chair, just before you do, intentionally or otherwise, you implied that I thought that this was an insignificant item, and that is not the case.
That's not a point of order, Councillor. It's just a debating.
I've taken offence at that because I was at pains to demonstrate that this is not insignificant, but it's just the precedent and the place.
Yes.
So I didn't know whether you intended.
No, I was merely stating in my debating point that yes, there is PC 120. Yes, there is a lot of other things, but this is just one item that can take up part of our debate, and replying to the fact that any of us can bring things forward that we would like to debate on, and it doesn't necessarily take away from other items. Kia ora. Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora. Thank you for the interesting discussion. A number of the points, as we went through this, that I was thinking, oh, I'll reply to that, and I'll reply to that, and my right of reply have been picked up by others. But I do want to dwell on a few things, and I think Councillor Lee's way of putting this as a timely audit of what we are doing and whether we are aligning on this specific matter is a really useful way of framing it, and I thank him for putting it that way. Because as with anything like this, it will take a very small amount of staff time, and I did check that beforehand with staff. It is a matter of bringing back to us advice for further action. And an interesting conversation there about the significance of this item. I was agnostic about which committee the advice came back to, and I noticed that the chair did mention value for money. I wonder, given the interest and the statement from Councillor Fletcher, whether it does come back to another committee of the whole, but I'll just leave that there. We can deal with that later. But I did just want to pick up on that point in my right of reply. I think what I really wanted to get across is that, yes, this is very narrow, but it's also very important, because the metaphor was used before of this being something that's outside of our remit. We're not sticking to our knitting. And I guess I see how we procure things as literally how we do the knitting. It is the needles and the wool that we produce a budget with. It is the way that we deliver for Aucklanders on the things that they tell us are their priorities and what they value and what we're legally obliged to do by statute, all of that kind of stuff, right? So procurement is absolutely our knitting. And having procurement, in a way, having a policy and ensuring that we are doing this in ways that mean that we limit our harm. That's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about limiting harm in an international scope here, but we already have a responsible investment policy, to sort of mix up investment and procurement for a second there, where it says, so it has a list of things that we exclude, and then it says, which are things like nuclear weapons and stuff like that. And then it says, in addition, while not considered unlawful, the Council would not expect their funds to be invested in companies that are directly involved in the manufacture of tobacco products, not illegal, the production of fossil fuels, also not illegal, and generating revenue from the operation of gambling. So we actually already have long-standing policy. This has been repeatedly signed off on by subsequent councils, that says that we do look at things not just on whether they are legal requirements, but whether they fit our values as an organisation. Some would call that our morals, and I personally don't take offence at that. Some others may, but we already are living our values with the way we invest and spend money on a range of other things. And I do not see this as any different. I see this as very much aligned with our other commitments about not spending not using providers who are also making weapons of war. because, as has been eloquently put by other speakers, that is the broader context we are talking about here. We are talking about settlements that have been recognised internationally and nationally as being illegal, as being a way of collectively punishing and disenfranchising the Palestinian community on their own land for decades now. And I absolutely think it is our knitting to make sure that the needles in the wool do not have blood on them. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. Right, we'll go to the vote now. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Opposed?
And would you like your votes recorded? Cool, so
Thank you.
Councillor Turner and Councillor Williamson would like their votes recorded as opposed.
And Councillor Sayers abstained.
Okay, hang on, Councillor Deputy Mayor, you'll have to say that on record.
I'm happy to do A and B and I abstain on C.
Okay, Deputy Mayor would like to support A and B but abstain on C. Councillor Fletcher would like to abstain on all three.
I'm happy to go with Councillor Simpson on that, and I understand there are others online.
Okay, and I'll just need Councillor Sayers, could you please repeat your vote on? We should have maybe done a division, I guess. But Councillor Sayers, you'd like?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just abstaining on all three, thank you.
Abstaining on all three. And Councillor Burns, just clarifying, I know you're losing your voice, I've lost your voice, but is it correct you would like to abstain on all three? Cool, so we'll just go, can we just have a count up of the votes? Sorry, I know this is difficult. Just bear with us, sorry.
Councillor Burns has, I think she's got some voice problems. Yeah, could we clarify with her directly by text?
Yep, she's put it in the chat, so thank you. We're just waiting a couple seconds and we'll try and add them up.
No one called a division, so we can't go back and do it.
Just checking, Mr. Chair, if we can call for a show of hands, if that makes it easier.
I think we've got it now. I think it's 14 votes in favour with 2 opposed and 4 abstain. Is that correct? 3 abstain. 4 abstain, yep. So 14 votes in favour, 2 opposed and 4 abstain. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we will have a, what should we have? Come back at 11:35. We'll just have a stretch your legs break, and people who would like to maybe not stay for the rest of our meeting, but kia ora and thank you for